The following presentation is brought to you by the Realm Network.
It's right about time again to swerve again, confuse the general fans again.
Oh shit! It's Vince Russo!
Vince McMahon's best kept secret.
I am the Antichrist of professional wrestling.
David can't run the world title.
I've got a wife, 3 kids at home, and I really don't need this shit.
How can this show be so awful, Mr. McMahon? I didn't think it was.
Viagra on a pole match.
And Hogan, you big bald son of a bitch, kiss my ass.
Judy Bagwell on a forklift match. McMahon, the family, the Rock, they screwed us all.
Now you're the editor, right?
Mankind did it! Jumpy, beat. Goldberg speared Russo out of the cage.
I'm from New York.
I'll get downright nasty.
This is Vince Russo's The Brand.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's show. Today's show that almost didn't happen. I've been trying to get Sean Waltman on the show for a long time, and then Sean Waltman was trying to get me on his show for a long time. So finally, things came to a head, and we set it up where I would go on Sean's show, and then Sean would come on my show, and we would piggyback off of each other, cross-promotion each other's shows. I know Sean Waltman for years and years and years. I consider Sean a friend. I respect Sean Waltman very, very much. So I was eager to do this interview. So I believe we did my part of the interview first, but we ran into a little bit of a problem. And the problem was that for whatever reason, we could not get hooked up on Google Hangout. So basically what we had to do was this. We had to go over to Skype. I hadn't recorded an interview on Skype in well over a year, so I had to kind of get reacquainted with that. So I got Sean, and I had trouble getting the video of Sean. I couldn't see Sean. I could hear him, but I could not see him. So I worked at it, and finally got the video. I could hear Sean, and I started recording the interview. There was only one small problem. When I played it back, you could hear Sean, but you could not hear me. No! Evidently, one of the settings was incorrect, and it wasn't picking up my microphone. So at that point, I had a couple of choices I could make. I could either scrap the interview altogether, or I could either ask Sean if he would do it again for me. And I kind of did the latter, and Sean did agree to do it again. But the more I thought about a couple things. Number one, Sean was gracious enough to give me his time once, and I didn't want to bother him again, quite frankly. Listen, man, Sean's still working a lot. Sean's very busy. He already gave me his time. I didn't want to bother him again. That's number one. Number two, I didn't want Sean to now know what questions I was going to ask, because we would have lost the spontaneity of it. And I don't like that. I want to be spontaneous. And I got some very spontaneous reactions from Sean in the first interview. So what I decided to do was something that I've never done before. Since I have all of Sean's answers, I am going to set it up for you to let you know what I ask Sean next, and then you'll get the answer from Sean Waltman. So, yes, we are going to lose the conversation between myself and Sean, but you are going to hear some very important, pertinent, interesting things that Sean had to say about his career, about the wrestling business, about the Kliq, about his relationship with Chyna, etc., etc., etc. I opened up the interview asking Sean about, what's keeping him busy these days, now that, he doesn't have the same wrestling schedule he once did. Obviously, he's still working indies. I worked with him not too long ago. I believe it was over in Germany, I think. Germany or the UK, one of the two. I think it was Germany, because I remember my buddy Boris being there. And I asked him what's keeping him busy these days, and he started talking to me about some of the breakthroughs he had over the past year. Here's what Sean had to say.
I'm keeping busy, Vince, and I've been working on myself more than I had. Let me just say, I've had a lot of breakthroughs in the past 6 months, a year. I have amazing people around me, and I mean that's one of the most important things is who you surround yourself with. And I'm just around amazing people. Maria Menounos, her fiance Kevin Undergaro, all the people at AfterBuzz. Just so blessed, Vince, right now. So blessed.
Continuing on with the interview, I then asked Shawn if he cut ties with bad influence, maybe some influences that led him down wrong roads. Listen, I say this all the time, and I learned this about myself. I learned this about my own kids. Who you hang out with and who your friends are and who your crew is, I guess they use the word crew today, can have a big influence on your life. Here's what Shawn Waltman had to say about those influences.
And I mean, a lot of them are people we really love. Well, I can just speaking for myself, but you know, I mean, like you just said, if they're bringing you down, man, you got to let them loose. You really do.
Next, Shawn got a little bit into his podcast. He now has a very, very popular podcast that he's doing, and he's talking about, you know, liking to have conversations with people, much as I do myself. And he also talks about receiving criticism and how he handles that and how his own podcast has been therapy for him. Here are Shawn's comments regarding that.
Yeah, that's the whole idea of doing these things is to have a conversation and let everyone in on the conversation. But I you know, I've said this on my show. You know, you get somebody on that you haven't talked to in years, and I'm terrible on the phone, man. I don't use the phone to talk, and it is what it is. It's not a good thing. Like some relationships I've suffered because of it. But when I get a friend of mine on the show or I go on theirs, it's the only time we get a chance to catch up, you know? Yeah, or if I don't really know someone, like you said, I mean, how long have we known each other? Jesus, 25 years? Well, I've experienced my share of criticism, and rightfully so. And I think that we deserve to take criticism, but we deserve to have, if we're going to give criticism, we need to be fair and give credit where it's due also, you know, and not just sling shit at people. You know, I mean, that might be what gets, you know, good for clickbait or you know, to get people to tune in or whatever. But I mean, I'm not a big fan of it.
Next, we talked about something that was interesting to me because I saw the 1, 2, 3 Kid when he first came up in the WWF. As a matter of fact, I remember better than anybody, you know, the big win over Razor Ramon at the Manhattan Center. And I told Shawn, you know, the 1, 2, 3 Kid compared to X-Pac were two totally different people, bro. If you go back and look at the Lightning Kid, even the 1, 2, 3 Kid, Shawn Waltman, and then X-Pac, this was a total transformation, a total change in character, a total change in persona. And I asked Shawn about this, and Shawn talked about, you know, when he first went to the WWE, being passive aggressive and how that changed when he came back to the WWE from WCW. Here's Shawn Waltman.
All of that stuff, I brought all this stuff with me into wrestling when I got into it. Like my experiences as a child, you know, everyone does. But so for whatever reason, I was always very passive aggressive. And like you said, as the Lightning Kid, 1, 2, 3 Kid in WWE or WWF, I mean, I used to take a lot of shit, and I had a hard time, you know, with confrontation, you know, sticking up for myself. Then, you know, I did some work on myself. I went to rehab, and I learned a lot about myself in my very first stint in rehab. And I ended up leaving. Obviously, we know the story of me leaving WWF and going to WCW. So when I had my run there and I came back, I had totally went the other way. The pendulum swung in the opposite direction, and I went from that passive-aggressive kid to this brash, I was an asshole a lot of the times, Vince, to be honest. Like, I look back at it, the way I handled myself when I got back, I was so worried about not letting anybody step on me that I was just incredibly difficult to deal with.
Next with Shawn, we talked about one of his best friends, maybe his best friend, and his long relationship with Scott Hall. What is that relationship about? How did the two come together? Some very interesting comments from Sean Waltman regarding his friend, Scott Hall.
Scott was a fan of my work from Global, but we didn't know each other. We knew each other in passing because I would be at the house shows in Minneapolis. And I knew Kurt Hennig. So Scott Hall is just one of those guys. He loves to take the young guys under his wing and help them out, and especially if they rise to the occasion. And because that's how Kurt was, and that's how people were with Kurt. So, that's how that whole, relationship manifested. And, just the love and the love of, the mutual love of wrestling, and also a lot of things in common, life experience wise.
Next, Shawn gets a little bit about how he actually got into the WWE as the 1-2-3 kid. Shawn was a big indie star. I was reading about Shawn everywhere as the Lightning Kid out of Minnesota. So now we talk a little bit about that break. Everybody needs that break. And how exactly did you get into the WWE as the 1-2-3 kid?
When Vince ran the whole idea by me, over the phone, I knew it was huge. And I was talking about this earlier in another show I was doing. Excuse me. And no one was brought in like that. You know how people were brought in. The typical 6 weeks of vignettes, and then you come in and get some squash matches, some enhancement matches. And, that's a brutal way to be brought in my opinion. Like, it's just the typical way. And it was never done before. Now they've tried things like that, since, but it just doesn't seem like that it ever worked like that one. Maybe because it was the first time. I don't know.
Next, we talk about something very interesting, and that is the relationship between the Kliq and the rest of the WWF locker room at the time. And there was heat there. There was legitimate heat. I remember the Kliq used to have their own dressing room. When I talk to you about the Kliq, obviously I'm talking about Sean Waltman, I'm talking about Scott Hall, I'm talking about Triple H, and I'm talking about Shawn Michaels. And they had their own dressing room. And I remember some of the other boys like putting signs up on their dressing room that were a little derogatory, not very nice. There was definitely some heat there between the Kliq and the rest of the WWE locker room. Here are Sean Waltman's comments on that.
It was an issue for them, Vince, a lot of them. But, there was certain guys that we get along with just fine. And mainly there were guys that were bringing a lot to the table, like Undertaker or, any of most of the top guys, just about. I know Brett didn't like us, but Brett liked me. I don't know, it wasn't a problem for us because we had each other, Vince, and you couldn't get in between us. And I understand why people didn't like us. I totally get it. But, all I want to ask them is, and they might just be honest, if you were in the same position, wouldn't you do the same thing? Maybe not in the same way, but wouldn't you? Who wouldn't, Vince?
Next, we got into a conversation that I always seem to get into, and that is, are there really such a thing as real friends in the wrestling business? Because I could tell you as I'm sitting here, I had thousands of friends in the wrestling business. She had thousands of friends when I could do something for them. when I was no longer in a position of power, a lot of these people went away. I'd say 95% of these people went away. Now there are maybe a handful of people that still call me, that still care about my well-being, that I still keep in touch with. And that's what this part of the conversation is with Sean Waltman.
Vince, I don't really agree. I understand why you say that, but my personal experience is I have friends in wrestling. And not just the Kliq. I love you, Vince.
Next, I asked Sean, what was the chemistry between the Kliq, between Scott, Sean, Triple H, Razor, and Sean Waltman? What was the chemistry? What was the common denominator where these five literally got together like brothers? And there were no cracks in the armor, bro. Trust me, I was there. I saw it. There was a brotherhood. Sean talks about that chemistry right here.
I want to be able to put my finger on one thing, but it's just the synergy of more than one thing. Okay, we all at one time, all except for Paul, we all like to get hammered. That was one thing we had in common. We loved wrestling more than any. I would like to think we loved wrestling more than anybody else in the company. May or may not be true, but I like to believe that. And we all made masterpieces in the ring together. And when you do that with somebody in the ring in front of 10, 20,000 people on a regular basis, it really forges that bond. You know, it's just like, look at the great rivals in boxing that became friends, you know, later in life or anything like that.
Next, something very interesting, how Sean was paid in comparison to the other members of the Kliq, because that's what I was trying to get to. As much as on the surface, there was a brotherhood and a camaraderie, was there competition beneath the surface? You know, these guys got paid differently. They got treated differently. They got handled differently. Did that come into play? Was there ever any competition or jealousy within the Kliq? Here's what Sean had to say.
We didn't all make the same amount of money. Matter of fact, people thought I made a lot of money. I made the same amount as Bob Holly did. People thought I made more money, but I was in the same matches getting the same payoffs as those guys. I acted a certain way, and I acted the same as the people I hung out with. So I don't know. I just knew that one day of hard work, and even though my attitude sucked, hard work, talent, and some other things I didn't realize the attitude sucked back then. Because when you're in the middle of having a shitty attitude, you don't realize it a lot of times. But I knew that it would pay off eventually, Vince, if I hung in there long enough, even back then.
Again, we talk a little bit about, did anything divide the Kliq? Women, money, power. Did anything divide these five guys? Because again, listen, man, I say it all the time. These guys are independent contractors. It's every man for themselves. To think that five guys with five egos, let's face it, if you're a wrestler, you got an ego, were constantly on the same page. Was there more than, I'm doing my Oprah here. I'm doing I'm peeling back the onion, trying to get some answers. Here's what Sean had to say.
Well, the only thing that actually divided us is when we left. That was it. And it was tough, and I know it was tough on the whole group, because we were very, very sad. And I was kind of in limbo because I was going to be the first guy to leave, but my contract rolled over on me before I could get my 90-day notice, so I was kind of stuck. And Vince was gracious enough to let me go anyways. So, there was never any one thing. We never had an argument or a fight. Nothing like that. The only time that anybody yelled at each other was in the ring. If one of us wasn't in the right place or something along those lines. And that was it. That was literally it.
Next, we start getting a little bit into substance abuse. in the WWE and in wrestling in general. I'm not picking on WWE. It's rampant in wrestling, and a lot of it are, it's painkillers. It's guys, working multiple days, working through injury, no off season. So a lot of times they are prescribed legitimate pain medications, but they take more and more and more of these medications to get through the next match, to get through the next day. And here Shawn gets a little bit into that addiction. What type of substances was he addicted to? And was it difficult to get these substances, or was it rather easy? Here's what Sean Waltman has to say about that.
It was mainly prescription drugs. Well, actually, 100% at the time. That was what we were, able to do, is take prescription pills if we had, had a prescription. And it wasn't that hard to get one, Vince.
Next up, we talk about how the physical pain leads towards the addiction and leads towards taking more pills than a doctor would prescribe. We talk about that. We talk about the relationship between the pain and the painkillers, and how it's, I hate to say it, but a necessity. These guys, there's no off days, guys. They're working one day after the next, no off season, no vacation. What was the relationship between the actual pain and the medication it took to overcome that pain? Here's what Shawn had to say.
Well, a lot of it's the mental pain. That's more, to me, that was worse than any of the physical pain. But, some people are just better equipped, Vince, at dealing with things. I mean, I do know people that have made it through and worked just as hard. And one of us was Hunter. He never got caught up in any of that. So I mean, it's doable. It's just that we're all wired different, and it's hard. And I just don't think it's fair to put a blanket standard on everyone, because we all have different stories, and we've all had different journeys, and different issues. I can only speak for myself because I'm not in anyone else's head, but a lot of it is the basic, you're on the road and you're missing your family, your kids, just when you really, really love what you're doing, creative satisfaction is a must, Vince. And when you're not happy with how you're being used, that will make somebody like me or somebody like my friends miserable. That's just as important as the money, almost. And then there's and this happens even though people might not mean for it to happen, it does. People in power positions in our industry end up, mind games get played a lot of times. People's lives get messed with, and it might not be like purposeful, but that's what ends up happening. And these things, what each individual, man, there's individual time bombs that are just waiting to go off. It's not so much the drug that's that important, it's escaping the pain that's that important, Vince. That's why we do these things. It's it ceases being for pleasure or to have fun, and it becomes escaping the pain. And that's where the problem lies. And that's why we have to deal with the pain. And that's what I've been doing. And it's been a long journey, man. But I mean, and I still have a long way to go, but I'm in a really good place when it comes to that. So I can sit by myself inside my own head now, which I couldn't really say any other time in my life. I can sit there inside my own head by myself and be okay and not need to get effed up.
Next, I'm going to give you a little tease here, because now we start talking about the relationship with Chyna and how he first got hooked up with Joanie Laurer. We're going to talk about this a lot more in the second part of the interview with Shawn. We touch upon it here. There are a lot of things about the relationship between Joanie and Shawn that I've never really spoken about, again, that I know firsthand. I'm going to get into that a little bit more next week. But now we're going to touch upon it. We're going to find out how the relationship between Joni Lauer and Sean Waltman came about. Because remember, Joni had been dating Triple H for a very long time. Triple H and X-Pac were boys. So how did Chyna wind up going from Triple H to X-Pac? You're going to get that story right now.
My grandmother. I left WWE, and I was in a relationship briefly with Alicia Webb. And something happened there, and I left her fairly quick, or rather quickly, I should say. And I was devastated, emotionally devastated. And my grandmother, she told me, she said, "Hey, why don't you go see Joni? You guys are really good friends, and she's in the area." I honestly, I never ever thought of her in that way at all, Vince, at all, ever. But it was great to see her. It was really good to see her. And it was like one of those things where, I looked good. I presented well on the surface, but was just, like I said, just devastated and kind of an emotional wreck. And I basically was crying on her shoulder about all the, my sorrows. And we were very bad. We loved each other, but we were very bad for each other. It's just because we were both in the middle of, using hard drugs when we got together. And we were both initially hiding it from each other. Which when you're hiding anything from somebody in a relationship, that's recipes for disaster right there. And I think I was a bit worse than she was. She was hiding it a little better than I was. Here's the thing, Vince. I don't want to lose my thought here. It came, so much of it was just the baggage that we were carrying with us besides the substance abuse. That was, like I said, all that's about is masking, mostly masking the pain and running from, from shit. But, and some of it was, at that point, was still partying because I'm not going to lie, man, her and I had a hell of a time for a while. But it was like living in Disneyland, man. It wasn't real. It was the Hollywood, going to the Billboard Music Awards, going out to the clubs, the paparazzi, getting all caught up in that crap, man. And it's not real. I mean, it is real, but you know what I'm saying. It's shallow, man. It's paper thin is what I'm saying. The things that she had to face were very, very scary events. And I think a lot of that stuff maybe she shouldn't have been facing at that point. Obviously, maybe not, looking back, the stuff with her father. And it's easy to judge things in hindsight, but man, I don't think she just wasn't mentally stable enough to be confronting those things. That, and we also have to be able to look in the mirror, and at least in the mirror, if not to everyone else, and admit we have a problem. Because I just don't understand. I can't relate to everybody knowing that you did certain things and you still not being able to fess up to, or not being able to own up to it. And that's just me,
Next up, I talked to Sean a little bit more about Chyna, and I talked to him. Listen, man, they had an explosive relationship, to say the least, and it took two people. And they were both very passionate people. And when you get two people like that together, when there are substances involved, it's going to be explosive. So I asked Sean the next question, if he wanted to make peace with Joni when all was said and done, and how he attempted to go about that.
Along with, repairing my relationship with my children, that is up there with the thing I really wanted more than anything, was to reconcile and at least make peace with her. We can't, it's hard to forget all the bad things said between, but I forgave all that as soon as it was done. A lot of it hurt, and I said some things too that weren't lies, but I I shouldn't have said them. You know, there was things I shared during the Opie and Anthony or Opie and Jim show when they think, some people think that like that was some kind of an ambush where they had. No, I was alerted that was going on, and then they called and brought me into that, and it got so ugly, and I was, you know, I was hurt and somewhat angry accusations, and I let some of that info out that was between her and I that I really wish I wouldn't have known.
Next, Shawn opens up a little bit about expressing his feelings and crying all the time. And this is something that has changed with him in age. And it changes with us as we all get older, bro. Listen, I'm a crier, bro. Bailey's a hugger. I'm a crier. And I've always been that way. But the older and older I get, things affect me more emotionally. The same seems to be happening with Sean Waltman in his life. He talks about that right here.
Yeah, I mean, anybody that knows me will tell you I'm one of the biggest crybabies on the face of the earth. I think I'm one of those people that's very, I'm like an empath. Vince, I don't even have to know you. I'll feel your pain, man. If I see you crying or know you're going through something, I'll feel your pain through the screen, man. When your mother died, dude, I cried over that. And my condolences. I didn't get a chance. I'm so sorry. Your mother and well, I mean, it made me think of my mom. Who you and my mom share the same birthday. Yeah, you were with when we were in Disneyland many years ago. My mom was there, and you met her. But sorry, I didn't mean to go off into the weeds there, Vince.
Next up, Shawn talks about his current lifestyle. What is he doing today in 2017?
I've got a pretty good balance in my life now as far as taking care of myself. So, and we need to do that, Vince, because we can't take care of others if we don't take care of ourselves, right? I mean, that's pretty cliche, but it's 100% true. But my lifestyle is I get up just my life. I get up Monday through Thursday, and I go do a Sirius radio show at Maria Menounos, which is amazing experience for me. I go hiking at Malibu Creek Canyon probably 3 or 4 times a week. I don't put any shit in my body anymore, and that includes drugs. I very rarely touch alcohol. The only thing I use is cannabis. That's all I use. People already know that about me. And I see a hypnotherapist on a regular basis. It's like a regular therapist in a lot of ways, but then we get into the first session. I did get hypnotized, put in a trance, and then there was a guided meditation that went along with it for about 20 minutes, and in that, when I was in the trance, that's when it's like, you know, like it goes into your subconscious, and so then these things are talked about that you need to work on, and I listen to it at night. And then like when I see her again, we'll work on some other things that I'm going through. And yeah, everyone, like different things work for different people. I've seen the biggest breakthroughs in my life with that. So.
And of course, an interview doesn't go by where you don't talk to somebody about DDP Yoga. And Sean Waltman has had his experience with DDP Yoga. Here's what Sean has to say about that.
Actually, I was just with DDP. Yeah. And actually, he's out here now. But we were talking about that because that is and would be an excellent part of it. And he's amazing. He is a saint. He really is, man. And just. I'm so grateful to him for obvious reasons. Like, Scott's here today with and then mind you, we do our own work, and Scott did his own work, and it's still a work in progress with all of us. But Dallas he never gives up, man. He never gives up on people. That's amazing.
talk about peaks and valleys. This is an individual that's been up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down his entire career, but he's still standing, bro. I told you, not about how they can knock you down. It's about you getting up. And here I asked Sean the question if he had any regrets, not only in the wrestling business, but also throughout his entire life. This is what Sean had to say.
Wow. Well, I mean, it's hard for me. I don't really like. I don't know, man. The only thing I can say for sure is I fail my children, man. If there's any one thing I would do over, it would be that. Everything else, I have no regrets, Vince. All the hardships, and like the tough journey that I've been on, I put myself through a lot of that. It wasn't like, there's so many people, and so many people, especially in wrestling, their whole theme is, I got screwed. I got screwed. Poor me, I got screwed. Vince screwed me. This person screwed me. Man, but what about what we did to ourselves and the part we played in it? And really, I'm just, speaking for myself, 90% of it was all my doing. Yeah, there was some things that, people did, but if I had my shit together, they wouldn't have been able to do that either.
Next, Sean talks a little bit about the creative process when a writer like me goes to him with an idea and maybe he has something else in mind. He talks about an example here with D'Lo where he may have had something else in mind, but going with the creative, it led to exactly what he wanted to do. Here's Sean Waltman's comments on that.
Yeah, well, let me give you an example of how much I wanted to do that. Y'all weren't gonna let me do that. Do you know why? I'll tell you why. Well, I can't expect you to remember every damn thing. I did something, I think it was with D'Lo earlier in the night on the same show. Yes. And it meant so much to me to go out there and do that you guys let me anyways. And like, I'll never forget that, it was so fun.
Next up, one of my favorite memories of wrestling. I remember when we had Motley Crue on the show. And I remember they performed on stage and Sean X-Pac performed with them. And I remember him telling me that day how important that was to him, what that meant to him, what a huge fan he was of Motley Crue. Now Sean tells me a little bit about the Motley Crue story that even I didn't know until he tells me here. Take a listen.
Do you remember what song they were supposed to play? Girls, 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 but we had to change it because Road Dogg's wife would have been hot. If they brought girls out on stage and all that, yeah.
And next, I complimented him on a very memorable promo when he came back to the WWE after going to WCW. This was all Sean Waltman, ladies and gentlemen. One of the most memorable, explosive interviews I ever saw on any wrestling show when he returned to Raw after leaving WCW. Here's what Sean Waltman had to say about that.
This might come as a shock to people, but promos weren't my strong suit. Some people are fine with, being, taking on a role and playing a role. I had to kind of make it real, man. Like anything good that I ever did was real. I wasn't the type that was good at doing it the other way. That's just me. And even if you go back and look at that promo, and I don't mind picking it apart now, if somebody doesn't want to go back and just wants to, have a good memory of it in their mind, it was a little bit rough. It was the realness. It was the authenticity. It was where it was coming from that made it good, and I'll take that any day of the week.
Now we get a little bit into today's in-ring product. I talked to Sean in detail how he feels about wrestling today compared to when he was in the prime of his career during the Attitude Era. Here's what he had to say.
I think it's evolution. I mean there's different companies that do it different. Like if you go and you watch New Japan show, they present it different, and the in-ring product is that they have a different psychology. they're going for there. And maybe like I heard somebody talking about how actors in movies used to deliver their lines, and if you look back in the like 40s or era like prior to that, everything was real over dramatic and like you never catch me alive, Ozzy Kappa, see, all that stuff. And so I mean I think things change and maybe we don't like it. And there's some things I do like, there's some things I don't. I catch myself falling into that. Vince, back in my day, stuff was much better. It's okay, man. That's just part. It comes with us getting old. And we're not wrong. You're not wrong, Vince. It's just your opinion, man.
Next up, with all the great things he did in his career, I asked Shawn if there's something in particular he wanted to do that he hasn't been able to. Is there still something on that bucket list when it comes to professional wrestling? Here's Shawn's answer.
I mean, there were things I would have liked to have been the Intercontinental Champion. I would have liked to have been the World Champion. I don't do a lot of thinking about that because I understand why I wasn't, at least the World Champion. I just think that the IC thing never came about. I think I was used even higher than the IC spot. I was getting paid more than the IC champion, so I was just fine as far as that goes.
Next, we get back a little bit more, talk about DX and the high quality of all the segments that DX were a part of. Listen, man, the performers were freaking incredible. The writing, myself and Ed put a lot of thought into what they did because we wanted to keep these guys on top. And at the end of the day, it was television magic. Shawn talks a little bit about these segments.
Well, Vince, our segments were also well thought out and they didn't just come off like an afterthought when you watched it on TV. I don't have to tell you because I've heard you mention it tons of times. Every match or every buddy had a storyline. Everyone. So like everybody felt like they were contributing, and that's why everyone was so happy. In the Attitude Era, Vince, it's because we all had creative satisfaction, even if we were in the first match.
One of my all-time favorite segments in my career as a writer and also as a fan was when DX came out and they did the mockumentary of the Nation of Domination. Listen, I knew, bro, this was either going to be over like $1 million or it was going to be horrifying. We all know history. We all know DX pulled it off. We all remember Sean Waltman as Mark Henry. Here's what he had to say about that.
Well, it's much like the Four Horsemen thing we did, similar to that in WCW. I hated the idea just as much as I did that one. And, well, a lot of it was because I was like, okay, we already did something like that, and I didn't want to do it again. And if I'm to be honest with you now, it wasn't my idea. And when something wasn't my idea back then, I automatically shit on it right away. And that's not just me. Isn't that anybody you pitch an idea to? And then once they think about it, but part of it was I didn't understand completely, but I knew there was some sensitivity to putting the black face on. I just knew that like Ted Danson had an issue with it. I didn't know about the minstrel shows I was ignorant at the time, but I knew that it was going to be controversial. And I wanted to, part of it was make sure, it was okay with everyone we were doing it. We were imitating because that's the main thing, right? And then the other part is when you try to do comedy, if you don't knock it out of the park, you might as well strike out because mediocre comedy might as well suck. It does suck. And we're not comedians, Vince. So we all, and you put us out on the ledge like that. Never forget that. We always appreciate that. No, but we could have fell on our face, but we didn't. And that's, and like to this day, like a couple of people have given me shit over it. As far as you did blackface, really not that much though, not that much, and I think mainly because it was funny.
Last but not least, Sean talks a little bit about his podcast, where you can listen to him now. Take it away, Sean. Give them the information.
Well, you can watch it on YouTube and download it on iTunes. It's AfterBuzz TV. It's actually we recorded as a TV show, like a Sports Center type of format in a way. I don't know if that's the right way of putting it, but we have a studio we do it out of, and there's video aspect to it. So, what was I saying? What was the question? Yeah. So you can go to YouTube or iTunes, and the show's called X-Pac 12360, and I'm looking forward to having you on tomorrow, Vince. Thank you, Vince. Have an awesome day, man.